everyone. What an amazing evening we had, and such a pleasure to be here with this panel. We're going to speak about civic activism, democracy, towards the pursuit of belonging. And as we start this conversation, I remember when we started this work with Kim, trying to figure out within Southern Africa, South Africa, how does the sense of belonging, connectedness play out in vulnerable communities, and trying to understand that. And where we have grown to, based on the indigenous knowledge systems research and other learnings, is around the responses to trauma and how we respond to trauma, and the ideas around fight, flight, freeze, fawn, faint, and in some cases, this professor we work with, she says, and we use the other F, right, out of frustration. And so in terms of that, what is the invitation? And some of the lessons that we've learned and the that she works with is flocking. And how do we flock to create a sense of belonging? And so when we think about active citizenry, when we think about civic activism and creating a sense of belonging, our panel is going to speak about the notions of flocking and how people come together around civic activism to do where we want to build, shape democracies and allow for people's voices to be heard and be represented. Those marginalized, how do we bring people in? So with that, I'm going to start with you, Ben, since you are the closest. And Ben Beachy, Senior Fellow for the Global Fund for a New Economy. Can you share a little bit about your work and how it builds democracy, civic activism in this pursuit for belonging?
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, great to be among you. I didn't expect to come to a conference on belonging and hear detailed explanations of zombies. So it's been an interesting ride. So a little bit of context for this. I've spent the last decade of my life working on climate policy. For a while, I was in advocacy organizations in the United States, like the Sierra Club and the Blue-Green Alliance, working across different organizations, across different movements, working with policymakers to build the strategy and the policy architecture that eventually led to the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest climate investment in history, which we got passed through our Congress about 3 years ago. I then went to the White House and worked in the Climate Policy Office to help implement that law, to help steer those climate investments towards clean energy, towards good union jobs, towards hard-hit communities. Fast forward to just a couple months ago, congressional Republicans decided to dismantle, in large part, that law, rolling back about 2/3 of those climate investments. And so you have a moment right now in the United States where the climate community is a little shell-shocked, facing a little bit of dysphoria, asking, what is the path forward? Is there a path forward? I think this makes sense, but we do need to dust ourselves off, reorient, and start building what comes next. And part of the task of reorienting is being really real about what has been working about our strategy and which pieces do we need to improve upon and do things differently. And there's a lot to say for what has worked well. Like in the first 3 years of that law, we saw the highest ever booms in clean energy installations in the United States, the highest ever union density in the clean energy sector, 3/4 of the investments flowing to low-income communities. Those are real wins for climate, for jobs, for justice. And yet, there was another premise of the strategy that has not gone so well, which is that by linking climate investments with economic benefits, we would spur this broad-based popular demand for more and more climate investments. And I think it's safe to say that hasn't happened. A demand for more climate investments is hardly on the tips of most working folks' tongues in the United States. We have to be real about that and ask why not. And there are several reasons, but one I want to focus on has a lot to do with belonging. I think one of the reasons you don't see broader demands to advance the clean energy agenda in the United States is due to a lack of broad involvement in designing that agenda. I don't think people are likely to call for investments that they don't see themselves in. And I don't think they're likely to see themselves in investments they did not help to build. And yet the path of building climate policy to date has largely and too often been just a project of the professional class. And so really what needs to happen is the workers and communities who most stand to benefit from a next wave of climate investments need to be at the forefront of helping to design those investments. That is critical both to get the policies right and to build the power to get the policies passed. For too long in the US, we've had this treatment of the building of policy and the building of power as two separate crafts. Policy professionals like myself are called upon to help write the policy, and pretty much everyone else is just asked to provide reliable votes every couple of years, maybe some calls to Congress. Well, that bifurcation, to use the vernacular of this conference, deprives people of their opportunity to flex their power for our shared purpose. And it has several key problems, and I'll just end with this to name them shortly. One, it's not particularly democratic to have such an inside baseball approach, right? Ignoring the lived experience of millions of people is not particularly democratic. A core tenet of democracy is that those impacted by a policy should have a say in its design. And this rift between policy design and policy impact undercuts that principle. Number two, it can yield misguided policies. Those of us who are policy professionals, we bring a lot to the table in terms of technical expertise, but we often are missing information about how policies are actually going to play out in communities, and that is information that organizers can readily offer if they're brought into the policymaking process. Number three, and lastly, a professional's only approach to building policy seeds opportunities to build power, and you kind of need power if you want to pass the policy. If we were to try to design the next big thing for climate action in the DC bubble alone, it would not result in another passed law, it would result in another white paper. So the path forward, which I and many others are squarely focused on right now, is climate policy written not about impacted workers and communities, but by them.
Thanks so much. Thanks. Sethu, I'm going to throw it your way, just to reflect on, because you also speak about what you say, putting lipstick, and I was asking you yesterday on policies, right? Just making pretty policies and not implementing. But for you to reflect on your work that you do and how it shapes civic activism and creates a sense of belonging.
Thank you so much, Marlene, and good morning to everyone. Hello, Toronto.
Good morning.
All right. I normally say that I'm a disability rights activist, and I'm also a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. I'm an advocate for that. And I'm also in the social services space where I also advocate for older persons. I've lived amongst a lot of grandmothers and great-grandmothers. I was one of the privileged children to be able to access that. And what really stands out for me in my work is to really enforce, policies that are going to ensure that everyone gets a place in society. We were talking about place yesterday and people. It's important not to just recognize each other as people who are coexisting, but to also offer a platform for us to be able to participate. And in South Africa, we've got one of the best constitutions in the world. And when I say lipstick documents, I mean that they sound pretty, they look pretty, but when it comes to implementation, there's poverty of implementation for people to actually realize that which has been promised to them. We've got a constitution, and as a law student as well, I got to learn about citizenship, public participation, and democracy in terms of making sure that, we vote for political ideologies that will then manifest into policies that would then transform communities. And for me, what stands out is I do the circular flow model analysis, where I look at, what is there in society in order for us to move forward. We've got different types of markets. We've got the labor market, the factor market, which are the means of production. And then we've got the economic market, which is the business market. And then we've got government, and then we've got households as well, which are the general public. Now, South Africa is one of the mostly unequal countries you can ever see in the world in terms of various types of demographics. We speak more about equity and equality. And when I look at economics, there's a mismatch of what it is that is available in the economy for people to be enabled to participate fully economically. And the actual transformation and empowerment that is offered for the general public in society. For an example, we haven't built institutions that are able to take people from poverty to economic participation, and to at least afford them basic needs such as shelter, food, security, and better health care. So there's a mismatch of that. And why is that? It's the poverty of implementing policies, and also the poverty of aligning resources to where they're supposed to be. And I'm the one who's not going to beat about the bush and call a spade a digging tool. I'm going to call it for what it is. The ubiquitous corruption within our state systems and the people that we put there. Yesterday I was talking about performative politics. We talk more about inclusion, but we never really tell people or get to understand what that means. When we speak of inclusion, we don't just say people must be included in terms of demographics and just list those things. We need to unpack as to what that entails. Just to finish off, on the flip side of the coin, in terms of community engagement in South Africa, we've got a lot of solidarity. Young people are taking to the streets, and it reminds me of that engagement that we recently had with synagogues around analyzing systems of local government. To say that we need to understand what it is that's wrong with the system and how do we move forward. Participation of young people really gave me hope that there is an solidarity within communities.
Thanks. Thank you, Sethu. So I'm going to come to you, John. Just in terms of your work, if you can share and your insights around the work that you do, what's needed in the world.
Yes, thank you, Marlene. And thank you for having me here. I'm so grateful to be part of a conversation that links belonging and democracy and community, because at the heart of a healthy democracy is healthy communities, is a sense of belonging. And so I'm going to try to link a little bit of what Dr. Bird was speaking to and what Ben was speaking to in terms of power, because I think both those are really key to building healthy democracies and building a democracy where people can thrive and people can engage and people can have agency. But I think one of the challenges we're facing and we're seeing in this moment, and we're all painfully aware of it on a daily basis, is there's a politics not of belonging, but a politics of division. And we are seeing people around the world, and in my country, I live here in Canada now, and I'm a proud Canadian, but I originally grew up in the United States. And so in my country of origin, we're seeing it painfully, but not just there, really around the world. And so how do we rebuild a politics of belonging, a politics of bringing people together, and that wins, that succeeds, that builds power? That's what the work really at the heart of what we do. So I lead the Democratic Engagement Exchange. I founded it at Toronto Metropolitan University in 2017 because we recognized and we saw that in Canada, there's a lot to be proud of and a lot to feel good about But we can't take our democratic infrastructure for granted. And we have to engage it. And so this is returning to Dr. Bird's piece, which I loved, that whole sense of how do we build community together and how do we understand that as key to our health. It all applies to democracy. And so that work of having kids running around together, finding their pieces, as community, doing those fun activities is actually key to democracy because it brings people together and builds those levels of trust in community that are being torn apart by our anti-social media, by our political leaders building on division. It's the things that bind us that then allow us, and this is the part that I think we need to be more intentional on, is to then come together around the issues that we care about, provide the platform for those conversations, and then build the political power. So it's exactly what Ben was referencing. We have this sort of elite policy-making class that goes in with, often with, well-intentioned to work around the climate change and the climate bill, critical to the health of our communities, health of our world. But we have to tie that back into community if we're going to build sustainable change. And that means giving people power. Mm-hmm. But right now, people are opting out. So how many of you here, this is a highly engaged community here, but how many of you know somebody who has said to you, I'm just not watching the news anymore? Okay, so a little honesty here. How many of you have felt like, at least sometimes, that you don't want to watch the news anymore, right? It's painful, right? And so when that happens, they win.
Yeah.
And so what is the pathways? And the way we do that in our work, all of our work begins with a very simple principle that we start by listening. Mm-hmm. A lot of us have strong feelings and strong levels of engagement and passions that we bring, and we're very good at talking. And politicians often are very good at talking, but really the best ones are also good at listening. Yeah. And so creating those opportunities for listening, and that actually starts in community with things, like going out for walks with your neighbors, and building those pieces up. So for all of you doing that kind of work, thank you. And I would just challenge all of us to then use those spaces to create conversations around issues that people care about, around the values that people care about, and then tie that into our political structures so that people can have agency. And that's at the heart of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks. Elizabeth, I'm going to come to you from a human rights point of view. And you recently traveled to Malawi and did some work there. There's a lot of us who participate in, I think, easy and accessible ways, but often they are marginalized people that need to be brought in. So can you share a little bit about that and creating a sense of belonging?
Absolutely. Thanks, Marlene, and so grateful to be here. Thank you, Kim. Grateful for the collaboration of the Samuel Family Foundation with the Disability Rights Division over the past decade or so. Last week, my colleague Sama and I were in Malawi investigating abuses against people with albinism. Albinism is a genetic condition characterized by a lack of melanin, which is the pigment that gives color to skin, to eyes, to hair, and it can predispose someone to having low vision and to acquiring certain kinds of skin cancer. There have been attacks against people with albinism over the past decade or so. Over 195 people with albinism have been attacked, killed, their bodies mutilated as a result of a belief that their body parts contain magical powers. and that they can be used to make potions that can make someone wealthy or win an election, those kinds of really dangerous myths. This, of course, is the very opposite of belonging, being hunted in the community in which you live, so a disconnection from people, feeling unsafe in the place in which you live. What does that mean for place? And basically tying this back to democracy, if we do not feel safe, we cannot participate meaningfully in public life. Belonging is a question that follows people with albinism across their life course. Sama and I did over 40 interviews, and it begins as early as education. The question, do I belong here? We heard from people we interviewed how they were not accommodated by the school system. They were made to sit at the back of the class. They were jeered at or laughed at by their fellow students, and many dropped out of school because of this denial of belonging. Without education, of course, it becomes much harder to participate in decision-making processes meaningfully. This narrows their options in terms of employment and opportunities that they can have, which means they are now relegated to hawking or fishing or farming or professions that actually need them to be out in the sun, predisposing them to certain kinds of skin cancers. Of course, this means poor health outcomes, which has an impact on the extent to which they can participate, and which reinforces their invisibility in society and in decision-making spaces. It is not all doom and gloom. We met also with really powerful civil society actors, so Civic Voice, groups that have risen up to put pressure on the governments to act, organizations of people with albinism, our partners on the ground. They have taken part in the amendment of the Persons with Disabilities Act to ensure there are clauses there on protection of people. They are currently working on a national action plan on albinism, so really pushing the government to make solid commitments for their protection and for the achievement of human rights. And in the recently concluded elections, albinism was actually a key issue, with both parties speaking about what they will each do for people with albinism. And so we see there the power of civic voice. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I think what you say is kind of paints the picture of what other groups also experience that are marginalized, how it hampers their participation and what can be done. Thanks for that. Jorge, Tamarack's work is amazing. What I appreciate about it is the collaborative nature of it. I'm curious if you can share how it builds belonging in terms of the kind of the vertical and horizontal collaboration across communities, but also within government, and especially the importance of government, and perhaps whether we can leave them out of when we're frustrated, right, or how we continue to include.
Absolutely. Before I share something, I'd like to ask a question to the group. And at least 3 people, they could just respond in one word and answer to my question. And please, we have all spoken, so I invite our panelists to not speak. So, what is your superpower? Just say it. I couldn't hear you. What's your superpower?
Love, I hear.
Another superpower? Empathy.
Empathy.
Which one?
Faith.
Faith?
Faith.
Beautiful.
Love, empathy, faith.
Awesome.
Navigating without Google Maps.
That's good. That's really good. Yes.
Yeah.
So-
Some on the side? Huh? Listening.
Listening. Beautiful.
Connecting. Your
Great.
superpower.
Thank you.
Yay.
So I asked this question because this is what's at the heart of our work at Tamarack. We believe that anyone can ignite change. We believe that communities know what the solutions to their problems are. They don't need to be told. They don't need to be treated as service recipients. Communities need to be at the heart and at the center of the change and the future we aspire to see. And as I share these words, I am remembering chapter 6 and 7 of Kim's book. I love that metaphor of heaven. What a beautiful story. Who wouldn't like to be in that kind of heaven, in which you can just enjoy the moment? I sense a lot of presencing. I also sensed a lot of solidarity. And I chose those two chapters because the work of Tamarack is rooted in place, and it's rooted in purpose. At Tamarack, we believe that we can end poverty in all of its forms. We're a Canada-wide organization, and we believe that poverty is not just economic. It's relational, it's also environmental, and it's also generational. We have networks for change that have mobilized so far 400 municipalities, developed 150 partnerships, and have also, only on the belonging movement, cultivated a movement of 9,000 learners that are excited to connect, to share resources, to support each other, to build mutual aid. We are really grateful for the support of the Samuel Family Foundation because it has ignited this movement. It has ignited an energy when others were not courageous to open the door for us. The Samuel Foundation was there and really enabled us to reach the moment that last week Canada's Chief Public Health Officer recognized the work of networks for change, for civic engagement, and specifically the work of these 400 municipalities as vital towards addressing the crisis of poverty, the crisis of isolation and loneliness. So I'm sharing these words because this is not top-down or bottom-up. We need each other. We need all of our approaches, and I want us to ground ourselves on what we discussed on day one, looking at the Belonging Charter. We need to build on what's working. This is really about connecting with one another, listening to communities, and amplifying those efforts. We also need to build shared language because we have seen through the relationships with communities that when we're able to speak the same language, beautiful things can happen. So there's more to share, but I'm conscious of time.
Thanks so much, Jorge. Thanks.
Thank you.
I just want to pull in your comment about looking at what's working. I'm always excited about Kim's articles in the Psychology Today. It's really focused on positive psychology. And I want us to center what is working within where we are at. Before we go to the audience, the question I want to plant is, what are the questions that we are not asking that we need to ask? And what are the things that we still need to speak about that we haven't spoken about? Yeah. What is missing? I think I just want to plant that seed as we're having these conversations and continue to. But I'm also curious, the role of government, and I'm curious about collaboration and how you see it and what needs to happen so that there's a better sense of alignment as we do together, because systems change and transformation only happens as the collective. So any of you, but
Sure.
Please go ahead, yeah.
Using the example of climate policy again, I put out there that I don't think the path forward is for a bunch of DC professionals like myself to bust out of our offices in a few years and be like, hey, guess what? Working America, we have crafted the second Inflation Reduction Act, and trust us, it's going to be great for your family and community. That would fall flat. Instead, if we're really serious about a climate agenda built by and for impacted workers and communities, we need to be in looking at actual proven models on the ground of participatory policy design. And right now, we have an opportunity in the United States at the state level to start that project now. There's a number of states that over the next 2 years will be passing clean energy policies. Could we equip more unions, community groups on the ground to really be the agents of that policy change, to have a leading role in designing the policies themselves? And to do so, we don't need to draw just on theory. we've actually have practice. We actually have seen this bear out in the US context and across the world, where communities have come together with policymakers, forging an alliance to build practicable policies that they need. An example, in Illinois, during the first Trump administration, you had about 20-odd faith, climate, labor, community groups come together in church basements, in rec centers, and hash out what they wanted to see in a state-level climate bill. They then partnered, to your question, they then partnered with state legislators to translate those high-level priorities into the technical prose of legislation. And because there was this really big tent involvement in crafting the bill, there was an equally big tent push to get the thing over the finish line. They leveraged their organizing, their advocacy, their communications heft, and succeeded in overcoming some entrenched interests and putting that bill into law. And it's not coincidence, I don't think, that that participatory process yielded one of the more ambitious and equitable worker and affordability forward climate policies that we have seen in the United States. And yet it's the exception. It needs to become the rule. What gives me hope right now is that there are community groups and unions across the country at the state level who are eager and are already working to design a next generation of clean energy policies built by them. All we need to do is feed it.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I like the idea of stretching the muscle of participation, and if you get this right, then you can do it in other spaces on other issues as well. So we're going to open it up to the audience. Yes, please, starting this side. Mike over here. I'm so conscious of, so I'm trying to accommodate.
Good morning, and thank you very much, and thank you again to Kim and the Samuel Foundation for having us all here. My name is Connie. I'm the Executive Director of the Disability Rights Fund. I want to pick up on the connection between community and policy, and I think you've all touched on that in different ways. We fund organizations that are activist organizations in the disability space. Elizabeth was mentioning the Albinism Network in Africa. We fund those groups, and we're just about to do some granting in the next couple of months. I think the granting will go to 47 countries. We had over 2,500 applications from local and national groups. Many of them were organizations of people with disabilities. Some of them are feminist organizations who are working in the disability space. Others are climate activists with a disability perspective. So it's really grassroots investment. And then yesterday, I had to leave the conference to spend an hour and a half with our lawyers talking about the fact that we are potentially at risk as an organization who invests in those spaces because we are a US-based organization primarily. I'm also talking regularly to bilateral government funders who have supported us in the past, who are retrenching that support. I think there is I think it's evident that there is a clear and deliberate strategy to defund and target those who are investing in the voice of the community groups that are going to create pressure on systems. And that's at its core what DRF is. We support local activists. We're not doing the activism. And I guess I'm really struggling in this moment with what are our new we're not changing our values. We know that's what our mission is. That is going to continue for many, I know this too shall pass. But there is this moment where it's, even among governments who have been friendly to our work, they're saying things like, we're going to mainstream disability. We're just going to put it into the climate change agenda, which really means they're not funding the activism. And I guess I want to get at that and understand thoughts or strategies that we could be shifting to make sure that happens.
Thanks so much. We'll take a few more questions, and then can we take a few more? There at the back, yeah, please, go ahead.
Thank you so much. That was another inspiring panel. Just to preface my question with, I wouldn't say I was a person who really felt belonging or had a lot of purpose, and it's been really great to be around people who aren't like that. I'm very inspired. I want to be involved. I guess my biggest challenge is there's so much suffering in the world. There's so many people who don't belong. Who don't feel like they belong. And there are so many reasons why they don't feel like they belong, and real reasons why they can't access that. How do you think about prioritizing, what to work on? Everything I've heard these last few days is an important thing to work on, and I just feel sort of like overwhelmed by trying to figure out the path. And I know, Jorge, you were saying communities know what they need, and that is absolutely true. But in an intersectional world where there's so much stuff going on, how do you figure out what you should be doing? And I guess what I'm saying is, how have you thought about finding your purpose, making change? How do you make sure that you're having enough change? There's an organization which I don't think I'm fully aligned with, called Effective Altruism, and it's all science. Every piece of suffering, every issue in the world, which one will have the biggest impact based on statistics? I think it's just one disease somewhere in a place. If we fix that, then knock-on effects. It's just completely removed from actual human beings and actual suffering and actual belonging. So whilst I'm a scientist, I'm like, I think there's data used sort of in the wrong way. But then still, it's how do you think about what you choose, what you work on, how you measure impacts in both a qualitative, quantitative? An individual is suffering in front of you, you can support them, but what is the opportunity cost of supporting 1,000 other people who are in a different, I find it overwhelming. I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, thanks for shaping that question, and it is a lot. And as you're speaking, I was like, there's the circle of concern, and then our circle of influence, and our circle of control. And I do think even in this space, it's someone spoke about, I think, the mini and small is all. And so how do we do and then expand? And I think that's your question as well. And even in this conversation, what is it that we can control? Where do we influence? And what's our concern that we can work towards? So the next... there was a hand here, Olivia, here in the front. I just want to give voices that we haven't heard as well. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Nicole. I live in a suburb called Mississauga, for those of you who are visiting. If you landed in Pearson, you actually landed in Mississauga and not Toronto. And my question is based on voting and engagement. So in the city of Mississauga, there is about 25% of voters who turned out in the last by-election. And I've been banging my head against a wall for about a year and a half, talking to as many people as I can to ask the question, how do we get the 75% of people who stayed home? And I was hearing, Ben, you were talking about the fact that getting the individuals who are affected by the policy to really get engaged and build it from the ground up. But when those individuals are not showing up in the actual tactical ways that you are electing your government officials, how do we get them to come and participate when they feel like there's just such this sense of apathy? And any sort of tactics or strategies around that, because it's been something I've been struggling with.
Yeah, thanks.
Marlene?
One last hand, and then we're going to answer, and any of the panelists can take just there.
Thank you.
And
Good
then
morning.
we'll do another round. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Mary, and I'm with Roots of Empathy. It's a children's program to build empathy, and it's all around Canada and many countries in 7 languages. We are under fire. You asked about governments. Well, I'm going to the United States tomorrow. I've told my staff, do not give the name of the organization. You might not get through. Empathy is under siege. And our whole idea of children being the carriers of the democracy for tomorrow, and if children don't belong, they can't possibly participate and they will not change the world. And empathy is the peace pill, proven to be able to develop it, which makes us under attack. So I would love to hear if any of you have any ideas about how to not wage war when you're under attack, how to be constructive and positive and strong. I'm weary and long in the tooth, and I really could use some bodies. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for that.
Thanks for the questions. I just wanted to answer real quick to the sort of the first one and then the other ones. I hope this helps. So I forgot to mention that our work is grounded in assets. This is why I asked this question at first. What is your superpower? And it might sound cheesy, but believe me, it really makes a difference when we start a conversation by celebrating the gifts that people have, by acknowledging their individual contributions, and especially in the climate movement. I actually left the climate movement a couple of years ago because I just found it very negative and pessimistic. When I rejoined the movement as part of my new role within Networks for Change, I am starting the conversations by looking at the gifts that people have and also the ways in which, with their existing gifts, they can create bridges. Another thing is we need to be able to hold complexity. Right now, we're at an age in which it's either everyone wants to feel right or wrong, that everyone wants to be able to feel that they're telling someone you're right or wrong. We need to move beyond that. We need to be able to recognize that sometimes we will never agree on some perspectives, and that's okay. That's the essence of democracy. That's being able to hold conflict in a transformative way. We're not dismissing someone's opinion, we're just holding that complexity that maybe this will never resonate fully with me, yet we agree that it's worth nurturing this democracy, that it's worth nurturing civil society. So those are the two pieces of wisdom I wanted to share.
Thanks.
That's useful.
Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Elizabeth and then Sethu.
Thank you, Marlene. Florence, I wanted to come in on your question about how we prioritize what we work on. I wanted to offer a personal reflection. My father had a mental health condition, a psychosocial disability. So I grew up with a very clear understanding of stigma and discrimination. As a result, when I listen to people with albinism, I listen, yes, from a human rights perspective, but also resonating very deeply from my own experience. And I think that there's something that we are each uniquely positioned to impact, either as a result of our experiences, our skills, our purpose. And I think that that's a place to begin. Where are you uniquely positioned to really have influence? And if we each began from there, I think we can accomplish a lot.
Yeah. Sethu? Yeah.
Wow, it's such a mouthful, a lot of questions really that came through. And one that stands out for me is how do you encourage empathy? Where we live in a society where people are so ignorant, right? For me, at Ikusasa Lethu, we had an initiative back in 2021 where we said, take a walk into my universal abilities, and it's also an event that we're planning to have in the next coming year, to bring people from corporate community members, different political institutions as well, to form part of, take a walk into my universal abilities, where we had people being blindfolded, others in wheelchairs, to have a feel of what it is to be in a position where the environment is actually disabling, so that you can have a sense of, understanding on what that looks like. That when you gather your thoughts really around how you interact with person with disabilities, you actually see it from that perspective. I think it's more of an encouragement, because you can't really control people's cognitive abilities around disability, around people who are different from them. And and also another question, Marlene, that came through was about how do we then bring, these institutions that are supposed to drive transformative change to society as well. I always use legal routes to actually do that. We need to have systems of accountability where we can hold, institutions accountable, because making sure that everyone has, equity and equality in society, we need to understand that, rights of persons with disabilities and other, marginalized or disenfranchised communities must be realized and must be afforded to them as well.
Thanks so much. Thanks. I'm going to come to you. John, you spoke about on-ramps and off-ramps, on-ramps into, and I think some of the questions is also part of that. I don't know if you want to.
So, yes, I mean, speaking especially to Mississauga, so on that very specific piece, let's talk, because we are about to launch the most ambitious municipal voter engagement campaign in the GTA's history. And so that's super exciting. And I think, it's everything that we've been talking about here. It is about, building that sense of belonging. It's about connecting with community in a way that's authentic, that builds power from a community level up. But on a really practical level, what it is about for us is we work with community-based organizations who have those trusted relations already, to build that bridge and that on-ramp to political engagement and political power, right? And so it is finding those organizations, those community members, those community networks, and connecting with them. So this can be, YMCAs, libraries, soccer clubs, those places that we're coming together, can be the walking club, right? Those are the places that can then become the on-ramp, but right now they're not. And I'll just quickly tell you one story where, we were running a program in North York with called Democracy Talks, and people use Play-Doh to create their ideal democracy. Well, we were invited in to a cook and learn program, and this is mostly women from South Asia, grandmas who are learning about their local ingredients, and they're there to socialize and have fun and connect. And we gave them an opportunity to use the Play-Doh to play and create their ideal form of democracy and talk about what that means to them in their communities. And afterwards I asked, well, okay, was this interesting? And they're like, oh, this was great. And I'm like, really? Like, you didn't really come to talk about politics or democracy. You came to learn about cooking and socialize. No, we love this. And I was like, well, why? I was like, well, we never talk about this. And I'm like, well, really? I mean, India and Pakistan, there's a lot of politics going on there. You come from traditions that are not that are very democratic. It's, complicated, but democratic. And they're like, no, for us, there aren't safe spaces. And so I think it's a reminder that to create space in community for these conversations is critical. Yeah. And those are the on-ramps that we need to create, because it's not just enough to show up and say, come out to hear about climate change or whatever. We have to build the stepping blocks to get there so that people feel comfortable showing up in that church basement, which is critical to the success of any of these programs.
Thanks.
But that we don't have the building blocks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks. Just quickly, and then we'll take.
Yeah, building on that, I'm addressing the same question on, how do you get to engagement? I don't think you show up at the church basement and say, hey, what climate policies do you want? Right? You meet people where they're at, and that's a thing that, as you know, the organizers have to do every single day. And if you ask people, instead an open-ended question, what are your biggest pain points right now? In the U.S. context, a lot of those pain points are around affordability, around the cost of living crisis. A lot of it's around housing. And so a lot of what we're hearing at the local and state levels is the rent is too damn high. I have really high and rising utility bills. I have to pay for homeowners insurance. And if you invite those people to design solutions to those very problems, they may come up with policy designs that actually reduce the utility bills through energy efficiency, through rooftop solar. They may find that climate resilient design of their buildings not only shields them from heat, from flooding, but also indeed actually reduces their homeowners insurance. There is a way to merge climate policies with affordability policies, with jobs policies, with health policies, meeting people where they're at. And this isn't, again, just theory, it is happening right now. I was just in Phoenix last week. It is happening right now on the ground. Unions and affordable housing groups are coming together, and none of these groups call themselves climate groups. And they're not starting with what are the climate policies, but in fact, they are designing solutions that are the climate solutions we need while responding to people's everyday lived realities.
Thanks for that. Last question. Oh, Ben, I see you. Okay, go quick.
Oh, thanks. I'll be quick.
So I also want to say the wisdom is in the room, so planting the questions, and even if it's not answered, it gives us food for thought as well. So
Great.
go ahead.
Thank you, Marlene. I don't mean to take the floor. I just wanted to, I wanted to point out a phrase that came up a lot across all of you, which in the disability movement is very central, which, as well as the LGBT movement and elsewhere, is this phrase, nothing about us without us, which you all really spoke to. And making sure that impacted populations have a voice. But I feel like those voices are quite siloed. And so I wanted to ask two parts. One, Ben, thank you for the last answer. You sort of addressed this a bit, but in the climate work, how is that voice being diversified, not only by profession, having trade unions and health workers or whatever combined in a space, but also LGBT folks thinking about these issues, refugees, people with disabilities, and all of these marginalized groups that we spoke about this week who also can bring something to these conversations and enhance belonging. One. Number two, how can these movements learn from each other? I feel there's a lot of lessons that maybe the disability movement can learn from the climate work that you were talking about, and vice versa. I think the climate movement can learn some things from the disability movement, and beyond. I think this space creates collaboration because we're meeting folks from these different movements. Thanks to Kim for bringing us all together. But what happens next? So how do we move beyond these days in Toronto and take this forward to ensure that there's more cross-movement building and learning and sharing?
Yeah, I love the discussion. I guess the question, but I'll explain the question. I know, there's I've had a lot of conversations this week about politics and that sort of thing, and people were asking me about how I feel about politics in my country and whether I like, our Prime Minister or not. And I think, reflecting on that, I think that's part of the problem, if I'm going to be honest. I think we spend too much of time doing that. And what I said to them is I kind of feel, as much as I really am passionate about being in it, I feel completely disconnected. And the reason why is a lot of the behaviours of the politicians. Like just last week, there was a Senate inquiry about our youth violence and about statistics around youth violence. And I was watching the senators spend 45 minutes either attacking each other, avoiding the question, or saying the same word 100 times. You see that all the time. Absolutely all the time, just non-stop. And it doesn't matter what side. So I want to make that clear. Red, blue, doesn't seem to matter. And what I find frustrating about that is it didn't used to be like that. There used to be a sense where people would debate ideas. And sure, they wouldn't, let's face it, we're never going to agree completely, are we? Let's face that reality. But there was debate on ideas. They would talk about things. Yeah. Where they don't do that now. They do everything else except that. And, like in America at the moment, like for the last 10 years, being completely honest, I'm tired of hearing that word Trump. I'm sorry, I really do. Why? Because that's exactly what he wants. And that's how he's winning. I think we need to find a way to get past that stuff and change. In other words, how do we change that behaviour? How do we get to the issues? How do we be a little bit more honest with ourselves? How do we actually discuss things? How do we bring people on the journey? Because I'm sorry, people are having problems with climate change and all of that, and I suspect it's because they're not being brought on the journey. Yeah. And all they're seeing is bad, and they're not getting any answers. So how do we change that?
Thanks, Ben. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. We are out of time, and as you answer, perhaps closing remarks, and my question is also, how do we take care of ourselves in this time as individuals? What's our well-being, and how do we take care of ourselves as we do the work? Right. But Jorge, please go ahead, like 30 seconds of closing comments. And thanks for the questions.
Let's not lose hope on the power of local governments to drive change.
Yeah.
That feeling of frustration, many people within government feel it too. My offering to you is like, besides naming and owning your superpower, find that deblocker within local government who can help you make change happen.
Thank you. Sethu?
Mine
20 seconds.
Mine is about deconstructing and reconstructing as well, and also not being afraid to reach out, because there are a lot of us who want to connect and find solutions within ourselves. There's no one-size-fits-all kind of an approach. It's through meaningful collaborations that we are able to move forward.
Thank you. Thanks. Elizabeth?
To answer your question on how I take care of myself, it is through poetry, and so I'll say a really quick one in response as my closing remark. It is a poem by John Rodell, and it says, "Whenever I feel helpless in this overwhelming world, I become a helper. On the days when it feels like I have no power, I serve others. You see, whenever I wash the world's feet, my hands immediately stop shaking, and I know peace, and I reclaim my power."
Wow.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
I can't follow that. I would just reiterate that, and that it is, for us, again, about beginning with listening, and do have trust that in our communities, as Jorge was saying, there is true wisdom and there is real wisdom, and that from that we can build strength and we can build political power, and making those connections will be critical, to our work, all of our works going forward. And so every time I struggle and feel hard, I go into community and just sit and listen. It's reinvigorating.
Thanks, John. Ben?
I'll just end by responding to this question here. Thank you for bringing the question about how can we learn from each other's different movements. I'll say from the climate space, the long arc that led to the big climate law that got passed was not just learning from each other, but merging, right? And so it was a merger of climate groups and unions and environmental and economic justice groups asking if climate investments could support good jobs and also investments in hard-hit communities. And we caught a lot of flack for this. We were accused of being guilty of a quote-unquote everything bagel strategy. I guess the proper analogy here would be a poutine strategy. I don't know if you've ever had everything bagels or poutine, but in both cases, they taste good. And the reason they taste good is because they combine ingredients that go really well together.
Yeah.
French fries, gravy, cheese, not unlike climate, jobs, and justice. I mean this it works on a metaphorical level, but it also happens to work in the real world. We know that to tackle the climate crisis, we have to mobilize trillions of dollars in climate investments. Properly guided, that wave of investments can flow into good union jobs. Properly guided, it can flow into the communities that have endured decades of divestment. Properly guided, our climate strategy is a job strategy, is an equity strategy. So yes, our movement should learn from each other, but we can also work together for collective goals if we pursue a poutine strategy.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much. So how do we flock into being poutine and come together? I really appreciate that, and Margaret Atwood yesterday. That was such a cool conversation, Kim. I marveled at you both just having that conversation. It's totally cool. Thanks. She spoke about the dystopias and how do we work from the ground up, and how do we build and grow. So really just that invitation for us, and how do we collaborate and stay strong together as a collective. So thanks to my panelists, really great. And thank you all for participating.